Hey friends, I'm back again with a book that I'm very hopeful you're going to love. It's the book The Art of War by Sun Tzu, the Chinese master. I'm sure many of you read it and thought a lot about it already. But I want to share a few thoughts about this book as I read this book over the years again and again, and why I found so interesting and what I keep learning from this book all the time. So this book is somewhere around 2,500 years old now, and even though the title is Art of War, I think it is much more than an art and much more about than a war. So I look at the war as a metaphor here, and I find that it can be applied to almost any situation of one's life. As usual, with something as ancient as this, there is some ambiguity, controversy about the author, even whether he existed at all, in which period, in which region, and so on and so forth. But that's okay, doesn't matter much. I'm using the English translation that was published in 1963. It was written by an American Army officer, Samuel B. Griffith, who was a brigadier general and participated in World War II as a US Marine Corps officer. And the foreword is by Captain B.H. Liddell Hart, who was a British soldier who was in the World War I action, probably in the Europe and the Orient, and learned a lot about Oriental history, and he became a military historian and theorist, not just a soldier. In fact, we will talk a little more about his foreword that will give you a better insight into how much that person thought about war and what he knew about it. So before we jump into the book, let us look at a few dimensions that literally form the foundation for this book. So first is, how was China like when this book was written? How were wars fought in those days in China? How does the book compare with the Western thought about warfare that evolved over last maybe 2 or 3 centuries? And then we will see a little bit about the structure of the book, the form of the book, the form in the sense that it's not a novel or a story. It's literally about 400 sentences, each sentence a completely standalone and discrete sentence. They are simple, they are even simplistic at times, and they demand a lot of thinking on the reader's part. They don't spoon feed the reader like any modern management book or do it yourself kind of thing. And what makes the wisdom of this book so timeless and admired over the world for so many centuries? So we'll try to understand these things as we look at the book in little more detail. So this book, Liddell Hart, the person who gave the foreword, the British captain that I spoke about, he writes extensively about actually another warfare book by Clausewitz, who provides the backbone of the Western thinking on warfare over last maybe 2-3 centuries. It was published somewhere in the middle of 19th century, and even today is taught in all the military academies all over the world, especially the Western world. A lot of misunderstanding about his book as well. Clausewitz used a dialectical way of presenting his book. So it leaves a lot of room for subjective and personal interpretation by any reader, and that's exactly what happened over the last 200 years. So many ideas were ascribed to Clausewitz, things like total war, total annihilation of the enemy, burning down everything, and so on and so forth. But interestingly, Clausewitz never said such things. It's just a matter of interpretation by various people, either out of ignorance or out of their convenience. So bottom line, Clausewitz and Sun Tzu are the two dominant schools of thought about warfare. And it is very interesting to see how they compare, and are they really so different from each other, or they have got a lot in common too. So that's what we'll try to look at as we go through. So the Chinese history, when this book was written around that time, say let us say 700 BC to about 300 BC, these 4.5 centuries, the China as a nation or a group of kingdoms The history for this period is very vigorous, both good and bad. But a significant change or transformation came upon the entire kingdom. And it has got many important names that we should always try to look at. One is 100 schools of thought, because it literally blossomed these kind of thinkers. Spring and autumn, or the classical period, or the warring states period, and so on. When you see these terms and when you know a little more about them, you understand the Chinese history and the Chinese mind. Many masters belong to this period that China is even today known for. People like Kongzi or Confucius, the revered thinker and the philosopher, Lao Tzu or Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. Taoism, that's the righteous way that all of us know about. And of course, Sun Tzu, the author of this book that we are looking at today, who was the military strategist who inspired and wrote the book Art of War, that is helping military strategists for the last 2.5 centuries all over the world. In many ways, these people, the Zis, the masters, they really defined a new way of life for China. They advised rulers, they read fortunes and created ordered ways to help the kings see order and pursue order in highly chaotic times. Some people see this period, not only in Chinese history but all over the world, as a very important milestone in human evolution, where people with brain became more prominent than people with brawn for the first time in human history. These are the people who started telling kings which wars they should fight and how they should fight and why they should fight and ways of winning the war, rather than people with great swords. I mean, at the end of the day, of course, the people with swords did the fighting, but the whole strategy behind that fighting was laid down by people who were not fighters but who were mainly intellectuals. So their existential, social and cultural impact even today continues to be very profound, not only on war but business, government and every aspect of Chinese life and even other countries. So with this background, let us see the book itself now. When Sun Tzu wrote this book on the art of war, it's always good to know how exactly the wars were fought those days, because today our idea of war is very, very different from what it was 2,500 years. Simply put, war was a ritual performed when needed, and it had a lot of strict moral code that could not be crossed. The wars, for example, would not be fought in winter or summer because the extreme weather was harmful to the soldiers' health. The war should not be fought during the sowing or the harvesting season because collection of grain is the most important activity for the human society. Elderly people should not be killed. We should not injure somebody who was already injured. So essentially, war was a corrective action, and it was not intended to massacre cities or win new territories or annihilate enemies. In fact, there is a story in this book about the prime ministers of two warring kings meet each other and among themselves decide to declare a truce and stop the war, even without consulting their respective kings. And that story will tell you a lot about what was the philosophy of wars in those years. But by 500 BC, 400 BC, these ideas changed significantly and wars became more ferocious because multiple reasons. Feudal lords who used to fight wars traditionally were slowly influenced by these intellectuals and their ideologies and their guidance. So war became more of an enterprise for the pursuit of expansion of the kingdom rather than for settling disputes that could not be settled by a dialogue. So a very important change during this period. So this is the whole context for this book, and this book is a very thin book really, just about 150 pages maybe, and it has 13 chapters, each having about 20 to 30 individual discrete statements, and it is written as a manual, right? So it is not a story or an essay or a continuum of thoughts or events or characters. We are looking at some 400 discrete statements, and I'll put a few thoughts in front of you. I'm going to talk about some of them, pick them up pretty randomly, except for the fact that I like some others, some more than the others that I've picked. The entire strategy of war is about avoiding the war rather than fighting it. So this is a very, very important thing to learn from this book, and probably as a distinguishing feature from Clausewitz. When you read this book and you start thinking about the statements that you come across, you start realizing that war is probably just a metaphor. It doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter what your profession is. If you have to compete in your life with anything or for anything or with anybody, this book is going to give you some important insights. I cannot say obviously if Sun Tzu meant each of these things literally or not, but there is a lot of wisdom in this. For example, one of the chapters is about importance of employing secret agents. So in today's times, maybe it is some satellites or technologies like artificial intelligence that are going to do a lot of this work. But the fact will never change that in order to win a war, and that war could be simply an information war, that war could be simply a business dominance war, employment of secret agents to collect data, collect insights that help you prepare for the war are always going to be important to keep in mind and prepare for. So that is the kind of wisdom that you get in this book. So let me look at a few sentences, as I said, randomly picked, but some of them really kind of providing a thread for his thinking. So the first one, for example, is weapons are tools of ill omen. So he's not praising war, he's not praising tools of destruction. He's saying that they're not good at all. So they need to be used sparingly, only when needed. This seems to be quite against what we have been looking at war as for last 2 centuries, where the weapons are touted everywhere as a demonstration or a display of your power. Then he says that there are 5 dimensions of war: moral influence, weather, terrain, command, and doctrine. So you can see here, even in the sequence is very specific. The first is moral influence. Why are you fighting the war? Are the soldiers who are going to fight it for you on the same page as you are? Do they believe in what you believe in? From there, you get into weather, terrain. Weather and terrain, of course, those days was more important than it is today, perhaps, because of much more advanced technology, that you are able to probably now fly whether it is day or night, whether it is raining or not, and so on and so forth. But in those days, of course, it was far more important than it is today. But all of us know, even today, weather and terrain will play an important role in the outcome of any skirmish. Command, how is the command given? All of us know this old dictum that a soldier has got a right to a good command. So providing good command to the soldier is one of the most important jobs that a commander or a general needs to perform. And finally, doctrine. What is the doctrine? What is the preparation mentally, physically of yourself as well as the forces as to why this war is being fought? If the doctrine is not clear, if soldiers are confused as to why they are fighting something, then the moment adversity arises, you are going to find yourself without much company. Then there are some important things about how to wage a war. And he goes into detailed calculations. For example, one chariot will have 3 warriors. 72 foot soldiers will walk behind that chariot. That group of people, 72 plus 3, will require 10 cooks and servants. It will require 5 people to look after their uniforms, 5 to look after the food and fodder for the horses as well as for the people, 5 people to collect the water, wood, and keep making all the provisions for the people. And that is how there is one company of 100 people. So this is the excellent level of detail in this book. And it reminds me of the agile teams that we keep talking about these days. You know, whether it should be an 8-person team or 9-person team, and then who should be doing what and how to achieve most efficiency. So planning of a team and keeping it small, keeping it agile is something that even Sun Tzu thought a lot about, as you can see from these details. Another important principle he lays down, which a lot of people do forget even today, as we have seen in recent history as well. When the army marches abroad, the treasury at home will be emptied. So always remember that all the taxes, all the money that you collected in your treasury is all going to be emptied when you send your soldiers out in the war. Next, it is best to take a state intact. To ruin a state in fight or after the war is an inferior policy. So as you can see, carpet bombing and destroying everything that used to be a city or a community is not good strategy. Sun Tzu is very clear about it. Winning all battles is not the acme of skill. He says, subduing the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. And how to do that? He provides many, many tricks. I think each one of them is valid today. And like I said, it is the principle that will matter. How it is done may be different today than it was 2,500 years ago. And then a very important thing comes up. What should you attack? So he says that first you attack the enemy's strategy, then attack the enemy's alliances, then the enemy's army, and finally, if nothing works, only then attack the cities. This is a beautiful hierarchy that tells you that carpet bombing cities and killing hundreds of thousands of civilians and maybe calling them collateral damage or whatever the new term is not going to really help you. If you can win over the enemy's strategy or destroy the enemy's strategy or his alliances or his army, then you are going to get a much better result than destroying the cities and civilian people and assets, because those assets are what are going to allow you to rebuild. So it continues like this. We come to the most important, perhaps the most famous dictum from this book. Sun Tzu says that know the enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles you will never be in peril. This resonates very well with many other schools of thought that we have seen. Know the enemy. What is he? Who is he? What does he do? What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? And know yourself. A lot of people may have a lot of intelligence about the enemy, but oftentimes they know very little about themselves. If you do both, then there is no way you are going to lose. Next one is invincibility lies in defense, but the possibility of victory lies in attack. So you can defend yourself very well and become invincible, but you can't win by just having a great defense. For that you need to attack as well. So now whether it's a game of basketball or whether it's a war or whether it's diplomacy or it is business, you can see this sentence is going to help each one of us. Victorious armies win before the battle begins. Those armies that fight with a hope to win are defeated. This is actually the central theme of the book. Every sentence somehow you will find relating to this sentence. That victorious armies are the ones that win the battle before it began. Those who cultivate the Tao, the righteous way of humanity, justice, respecting institutions, those are the people who can formulate victorious policies, which means those are the ones who will make victory sustainable for themselves or for their people. Getting a victory by burning everything in your path is one part, but keeping it in your kingdom, deriving benefits for that, for your people, or even for the people who are subdued, those are the things that make the victory sustainable. And the cultivation of Tao, or you can see in many other societies or periods of time, like for example the Vedic concept of dharma will say a lot of things similar to this. Then comes a very interesting sentence which is more about the operational side. Management of many is the same of management of a few. So we have got lots and lots of tomes of management education on how to manage 10 people versus 100 people versus 1,000, and then how wastage grows. Sun Tzu says no, managing a lot of people is the same as managing a few. So what he's saying is the clarity, the connection with people, the moral connection, if all those things are clear, then people get self-managed by and large. And that's why it doesn't matter whether you have to manage a few or many. A wise commander, I think this is super critical for all of us. A wise commander seeks victory from the situation and not from his subordinates. He does not expect that his subordinates are going to perform some heroics every time to bring victory. His subordinates are going to perform what they are taught to perform, what the guidance, the instructions that they are given to execute. But the commander is going to be responsible for figuring out what are the situations that is going to exploit to make victory possible. Then there is another gem about how everyone is useful as long as the commander is smart. He says the valiant can fight, the cautious can defend, the wise can counsel. It's up to the commander to know whom to use for what. This is how it goes on, and I don't know, maybe I can talk about a few more because, like I said, all 400 are equally important. A protection of metal walls is not as important as food. So the importance of food and resources to keep the people well fed and comfortable in what they're doing, comfortable as much as possible in a war situation. Another important one is those who do not employ local guides cannot obtain advantages of the terrain. You can see why all of us need partnerships and franchises and so on and so forth. The importance of local intelligence, local understanding. When you surround an enemy, he suggests, make sure that you leave an escape route open. Because even if the enemy wants to escape or surrender, if you don't allow him to, then he is forced to fight. And sometimes when they fight because they have got no other option, the outcomes of battles, all of us know, have changed significantly when the opposing party was left with no choice. Sometimes he says that a sovereign's command may not be obeyed by the commander. Now this will require a lot of thinking as to what are those situations when this can happen, and how is it justified, under what circumstances it is justified, and so on. Then comes a very important and statement that I had to spend a lot of time. He says the purpose of army or army administration is to cultivate a uniform level of valor. So it's not about one great hero slaying 100 soldiers or one great soldier manning a machine gun post and doing this and doing that. All that is great, of course, but that's not the purpose of military administration according to Sun Tzu. He says that a uniform level of valor is important for a military to be sustainable and win over a long period of time. And uniform level of valor cannot be heroics, as we can all easily understand. So just think about it. If you are ignorant about the surrounding states, both their intents, their power, their geography, then you cannot survive for long. So you need to know everyone around you, and in today's terms, of course, around means everybody around the planet, if not outside of the planet all as well. So you need to know them, you need to know what their strengths are, what their intents are, otherwise you are not going to be in the game for a long period of time. Again, it goes back to the importance of secret agents, and he talks about actually different types of secret agents. Some secret agents do this kind of work and some others do some other kind of work and so on. And he says, just so that the reader doesn't forget, that an army without secret agents is like a man without ears and eyes. So go fight a war with those handicaps. There are many, many more things you can say. Each of the 400 sentences is worth talking about, but I guess you got a fairly good sense of why this book is so important. And no matter what your war is, what your profession is, what your challenges are, this book is going to help you win it. So I thought that's what I'll share with you today. Thank you very much, and please do subscribe to my channel, and also set up if you want to get informed when I do my new sessions. So, and also I'll provide some links to the book, to the other people's commentaries on the book, so that you can see more about this book and learn about this book. Thank you so much.